Donald Trump is, of course, still saying that Canada should become the 51st state. Speaking to a group of Republican governors in Washington on Thursday, he made those comments again. While Canadians do not want to be part of the U.S., Puerto Ricans do. The U.S. territory has voted for statehood several times in non-binding referendums. If allowed in, residents would get to vote in presidential elections, and they'd likely gain federal funding. Ricardo Rosselló is a former governor of Puerto Rico, longtime advocate for statehood, and I spoke to him about why becoming a state would benefit both Puerto Rico and the U.S. and how he feels about Trump's annexation comments. Ricardo Rosselló, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you, Rosemary. Pleasure to be here with you.
Yeah, really good to get your perspective on a few things that are happening from Canada's point of view. But I want to start with the point of view you're more familiar with. That's Puerto Rico. You've been a proponent of statehood for Puerto Rico. Why do you think that Puerto Rico should become a U.S. state? What would be the benefit of that?
Well, there's plenty of reasons. The top of mind is quality of life. Puerto Ricans, different than Canadians in that sense. We've been part of the United States as an unincorporated territory for over 100 years. We also have U.S. citizenship, but by virtue of being a territory, we lack in not only representation and voting for our president, but also in resources. So it is the next logical step moving forward, and I think it's, and I believe, as do my brethren, that it's the best path forward for Puerto Rico.
Yeah, you're sort of in a gray zone, is how I would describe it a little bit. And certainly, as you said, most Puerto Ricans want this to happen. About 60%, I think, is the most recent vote. Why do you think Congress is not entertaining this idea right now?
Well, it's always a push. If you look at the history of the United States, the transition of territories towards states typically takes a while. There are some logistical considerations in the forefront, whether it's the economy or some sort of a connection. But then at the end, it boils down to politics and which party supports it and which party doesn't. Our hope is that it could be a bipartisan effort. We see Puerto Rico as what's called the battleground state. Certainly, it's voted Democrat in some instances, but for the most part, it is a center-right society. So we believe that Puerto Rico can add a ton of value to the United States. And you know, Rosemary, we're already within the United States. A big difference is that the U.S. citizens on the island, we number about 3.2 million, whereas those Puerto Ricans that have moved to the States because they can just jump on a plane, it's about 6 million Puerto Ricans in the state. So it's the next natural step. If President Trump wants to be an expansionist president, what better way to expand than to give the U.S. citizens of Puerto Rico that next step?
So how do you convince him? Because you're right, he seems to be leaning towards expansionism. Is it appealing to the idea of more national security, of, I don't know, just having more territory? What would be the deciding factor for him, or what has he said in the past would influence him?
Well, it's a great question. I've had the opportunity of interacting with President Trump when I was governor, and I point blank asked him in one of our interactions. And of course, you know, he mixes some of these comments with some jokes. The jokes might be taken a little bit out of context, but the seed was planted. I do believe, as you mentioned, national security is one point. I also believe that Puerto Rico is the natural connector of the Americas. Look, we're part of the United States. We are dead smack in the middle of the Americas. We speak Spanish, speak English. We can be that powerful bridge between South and North America in a very meaningful way. In addition to all of the additions that our folks have made to the armed forces and other sources of science. So we're coming over here, Rosemary, in March 3rd to 5th. A bunch of Puerto Ricans, they're called the Extended Delegation of Puerto Rico, are going to come to Congress, push for this bill to pass so that we can give Puerto Ricans a binding vote and make that transition towards statehood.
Fascinating. So obviously the reason that we're interested a little bit more in Puerto Rico than we would be normally is because we are being threatened with annexation and becoming the 51st state. And we don't want that. You do. We don't. I wonder what you make of those comments as someone who is really legitimately fighting for this to happen for Puerto Rico.
Well, let me just say that President Trump has a history of making off-the-cuff comments that could be jokes or could be misconstrued. I mean, in my case, when we were having this argument about Puerto Rico, his reply was that he would make it a state if I could get him 2 Republican senators. Some people took that seriously, some people didn't. I presume, and I've seen and I've read in Canada, it's kind of been the same thing, right? There's a lot of people that are concerned about those comments, and some see it as a little bit of an off-the-cuff comment. But there are stark differences, of course. The first one being Puerto Ricans want to become a state, whereas Canadians, for the most part, what I've seen in the polls, historically do not want to become a state. So that's number one. Number two, we are already part of the United States. The transition would be much clearer. So to me, I mean, we could debate many other reasons, but I think that the fundamental one in our democracy is, do your people want it or do they not want it? And because our people in Puerto Rico want it, we're going to come over here in Washington, show the results of our local plebiscites as not only Puerto Ricans from the island, but also over 30,000 Puerto Ricans in the States that are arguing for this. You have an effort moving, whereas in Canada, that's not the case.
I wonder, though, whether you think that conversation sort of gets in the way of the real thing that you want to see happen for Puerto Rico. Like, does that worry you, that is taking up space in the president's mind when this is a real offer on the table for Puerto Rican statehood?
Well, I certainly hope not. Look, there's many things with this presidency. There's many things going on. You kind of have to keep track of them. You have to stay focused, and we believe we have a very strong argument. Again, supported by the people in the United States, I should say, as well. And that's a normal transition. I would, I understand the concerns. I would be too, probably if I were living in Canada. But I would just say that we live in democracy. And the will of the people will override any comment or any whim towards annexation.
This is a super interesting part of this story, and it may lead, as to your point, there may be a window here for Puerto Rico that wasn't there before. Ricardo Rosselló, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Rosemary.